The ballroom went quiet before he even crossed the threshold. Not the polite quiet of a room waiting for a speech, the held breath kind. The kind that happens when everyone in the room knows, without looking directly at him, that Ronan Vale has just arrived. Addie Corrin didn't know that yet. She was standing near the far wall with a glass of sparkling water she hadn't touched, wearing a dress that didn't belong to her, trying to remember how to breathe normally at a party where she knew exactly one person, and that one person had just done something unforgivable. She hadn't wanted to come. That part is important. She had said no 3 times, but her sister-in-law, Darla, had a way of making no feel like a character flaw, so eventually Addie had stopped saying it. Darla had handed her the dress, a deep burgundy thing, structured at the shoulder, the kind of dress that made a statement Addie had never intended to make, and told her it was a gift, told her the event was a small dinner, told her it would be good for her to get out of that apartment, to stop grieving so loudly in a place where people could see. What Darla had not told her was that the woman who had bought that dress, and who fully intended to wear it tonight, was Darla herself. Addie found out the way you find out most things you weren't supposed to know, by accident, and at the worst possible moment. She was standing near the center of the room when Darla walked in wearing something else entirely, looked at Addie from across the chandeliers and cocktail tables, and smiled the way you smile at something you set in motion and are now watching arrive exactly on time. A woman beside Darla leaned in and whispered something. Darla laughed, not loud, just enough. Addie understood then. The dress wasn't a gift, it was a costume. And the event wasn't a dinner. It was a fundraising gala hosted by the Whitmore Foundation, attended by half of Chicago's most connected families, and Addie, a 31-year-old who had spent the last year quietly dissolving after her husband's death, who had been wearing the same cardigan for most of that time, who worked 4 shifts a week at a bakery to make rent, was standing in the middle of it wearing a dead woman's dress that her sister-in-law had told everyone she'd stolen. She heard it before she fully processed it. A murmur moving through the nearest cluster of guests, a woman in pearls glancing at her with that particular brand of pity that's really just contempt dressed up. Someone laughing, someone repeating something, a name, a rumor, a story, and Addie could feel the edges of it without hearing the center. She started toward the exit. That was all she wanted. To find her coat and get out before whatever this was finished, becoming what it was becoming. She didn't make it. Darla materialized at her elbow with the smoothness of someone who had been watching and timing. She took Addie's arm, not rough, nothing that would look rough, and said quietly with her lipstick smile, "Leaving so soon? After everything Marcus left you?" Marcus was Addie's husband, Darla's brother. He had been dead for 14 months. The inheritance dispute had been ongoing for 12 of those months. Quiet and grinding, handled through lawyers and loaded silences at family dinners Addie had stopped attending. She had never spoken about it publicly. She had never spoken about much of anything publicly. Darla had, apparently. Tonight, to a room full of people who didn't know Addie's name 20 minutes ago and now knew the story Darla wanted them to know. "Let go of my arm," Addie said. "You should be careful," Darla said, still smiling, still quiet. "Wearing things that don't belong to you." Then she reached up, slow, deliberate in the sight line of the nearest cluster of guests, and plucked something from Addie's neckline. A small gold pin, one that had belonged to Marcus's mother, that Darla had tucked onto the dress herself when she handed it to Addie, which Addie had assumed was part of the outfit, which Addie now understood was evidence. Addie felt it then. Not just embarrassment, but something worse. The specific vertigo of being the subject of a story you didn't write, in a room that has already decided to believe it. She'd felt it during the inheritance battle. She'd felt it at the reception after Marcus's funeral, when Darla made a toast that was really a biography of everything Addie had failed to be. She'd spent 14 months learning to survive that feeling by going very still, very quiet, by making herself small enough that it moved around her. She couldn't do that here. There was nowhere small enough to go. She pulled her arm free. Darla let her, because the performance was already done. Addie turned toward the exit and the crowd shifted. Not deliberately, just the way crowds do, finding reasons to face slightly toward whatever scene is developing, and she felt every pair of eyes even though she wasn't looking at any of them. She made it about 6 feet. Then the crowd parted differently. Not shuffling apart but stepping, the way people step when something in their peripheral vision tells them to move without being asked. Ronan Vale walked through the gap. He wasn't particularly tall. That was the first thing she noticed later, when she had space to notice things. He was broad-shouldered and dark-suited, and he moved with a particular kind of deliberateness that made the room subtract itself from his path, rather than requiring him to navigate it. His face was the kind of face that had stopped being young some time ago and hadn't replaced youth with age so much as with something harder and more considered. He was looking at her, not at Darla, not at the crowd, at her, with the focused attention of someone who had assessed a situation and already reached a conclusion. He came to stand beside her, not in front, not behind, beside, and he turned very slightly to face the nearest cluster of onlookers. He didn't say anything for a moment. The room, which had been doing the cocktail party murmur, had gone quiet enough to hear the ice shift in a glass 20 feet away. Then he said calmly, without raising his voice, "Mrs. Corrin is here as my guest." Not loudly, not angrily. The way you state a fact you have no particular interest in debating. Addie looked at him. She had never seen this man before in her life. He didn't look at her. He looked at Darla, who had gone the particular shade of pale that skin goes when the blood is deciding which direction to run. "I believe," Ronan Vale said, still in that same conversational register, "that there's been some confusion about the evening." That was all, 2 sentences. No raised voice, no threat that you could point to and say, "That right there." Just the weight of whoever he was, distributed across the room like pressure, and the understanding, moving through the gathered guests the way the rumor had moved through them 20 minutes ago, but faster because this kind of message travels faster, that the story had just changed. Darla took a single step back. Ronan Vale turned to Addie and said more quietly, "Can I get you a drink, or would you prefer to leave?" She looked at him for a long moment. She was still shaking, though she hoped it didn't show. "Leave," she said. "Please." He nodded like that was the obvious correct answer and turned to walk her out. She followed him because there was no world in which she didn't. The lobby outside was marble and quiet. Ronan Vale stopped near a column and spoke to someone on his phone in a low voice, then put it away and looked at her. "You don't know who I am," he said. "It wasn't a question." "No," Addie said. "Should I?" Something shifted in his expression, not quite amusement, but adjacent to it. "Not necessarily. Why did you do that?" He looked at her for a moment before answering. "I knew your husband." Addie felt that land in the specific way things land when you're not braced for them. 14 months and she still wasn't braced for mentions of Marcus. Probably wouldn't be for a long time. "You knew Marcus. We did business together, a long time ago. Before," he paused, not with discomfort, just with precision. "Before his family made it difficult." She understood what that meant. The Corrin family had spent the years after Marcus built his small development company trying to take pieces of it. Marcus had, in the last few years of his life, become quietly unreachable to most of the people he'd once worked with. Addie knew that. She'd watched it happen and hadn't fully understood until after he was gone what it had cost him. "He talked about you," Ronan Vale said. "He called you the only honest thing in his life." That's a quote. Addie looked away. She had to, for a moment. "I saw what your sister-in-law was doing," he said, "and I recognized the method. Darla Corrin does what the family does. They take a version of events and they put it in the room before the actual person can. By the time you walk in, the story is already there." "Yes," Addie said. "That's exactly what it is." "I'm Ronan Vale," he said, like he was completing a form. She'd heard the name, somewhere. Business news, maybe. Property. Something that made people speak carefully. "Addie Corrin." "I know," he said. "His car is outside. I'll have it take you home if you want." She wanted to ask which car, whose car, what this man's relationship with her dead husband had actually been, and whether she was trading one complicated situation for another. She was tired and her shoes were wrong for the floor, and she'd been standing in a borrowed dress that was apparently evidence of a crime she hadn't committed for the last 45 minutes. "Okay," she said. The car was black and warm and took her to her apartment without requiring her to explain anything. She didn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table with cold coffee and went back over the previous 2 years the way she'd been going back over them constantly, trying to find the points where things had turned. Marcus had died of a cardiac event, sudden in the early morning. 43 years old, no real warning. Addie had been asleep when it happened. She'd woken up to a sound she still couldn't describe, and that was the dividing line of her life. Before and after, the Corrin family had moved in within a week. Not openly hostile, never openly hostile, but present in a way that reconfigured the space. Darla taking over the practical arrangements because Addie was grief-stunned and couldn't, then staying. Then, gradually contesting. The will had been clear, but there were questions about a secondary property, questions about certain business accounts, questions that multiplied the more. Addie tried to answer them. Her lawyer said it was winnable. It had been 12 months and she didn't know what winning looked like anymore. She'd kept working the bakery shifts, because the routine was the only thing that felt real. She'd kept paying rent on the apartment she and Marcus had shared, which was now too large and too full of his things. She'd stopped going to things, dinners, events. Everything that required her to be somewhere, present, visible. Until Darla called with the dress and the invitation and the voice that made saying no feel like a character flaw. She should have known. She had known, actually, in a low-level way, and she'd gone anyway. That was the part she kept returning to. She'd known something was off, and she'd gone anyway because she was too tired to trust her own instincts. The next morning she got a message from an unknown number. "I'd like to speak with you if you're willing. Breakfast or coffee? Your preference. Ronan Vale." She looked at the message for a long time. She typed back, "How did you get this number?" "Marcus gave it to me," he replied. "3 years ago. I didn't use it until now." She stared at that. Then she typed, "The bakery on Wells opens at 7. I'm there most mornings." She put the phone down and didn't look at it again until 5:30, when she had to get up for work. He came at 8:15, which told her he was either late or making a point about not rearranging his schedule to be somewhere at 7. He sat across from her in the corner table that she'd claimed for herself over 18 months of early shifts, and he ordered black coffee and looked at the laminated menu like he was genuinely reading it. "You don't have to order anything," she said. "I know," he said. "I want the eggs." He had the eggs. She had her second coffee of the morning. The bakery was the kind of place that had been there since before Wicker Park got expensive and had resisted becoming a concept. Old counters, handwritten specials, regular customers who nodded at each other but didn't necessarily talk. Ronan Vale ate his eggs and didn't seem to notice that he was out of place. "Tell me about the estate," he said. She looked at him. "Why?" "Because I know what the Corrin family does," he said. "And I know what Marcus built before they started dismantling it. And because what Darla did last night wasn't just about a dress and a pin. It was about establishing a narrative before you have a chance to establish one of your own." Addie wrapped her hands around her mug. "What do you want from this conversation?" "To understand the situation," he said. "And to tell you that Marcus, in the last year of his life, transferred a specific portfolio of holdings into a separate trust. One that predates the contested claims. One that Darla's lawyers have either not found or not disclosed." The mug was warm against her palms. She didn't say anything. "He told me about it," Ronan continued. "And he told me that if something happened to him, the only person he trusted to tell was you. He made me promise to tell you in person. I couldn't find a way in. The family had closed the perimeter by the time I heard he was gone. Last night was the first time I'd been in the same room as you." Addie said, "That's a very large thing to tell a stranger over eggs." "Yes," he said. "Do you have documentation?" He looked at her like that was the right question. "I can connect you with the attorney who handled it. Whether you trust me or not, you should speak with her." She sat with that. Outside, a bus went past and the windows rattled slightly the way they always did. "Who are you, really?" she said. "What was your business with Marcus?" "Property," he said. "Development. Some things that aren't worth going into before you know me better." He said this without particular emphasis, like he was describing the weather. "Marcus knew who I was when we started working together. He made his own decisions about it." She thought of Marcus, not the grief-softened version she'd been carrying, but the actual man, the one who'd bought property nobody else wanted in neighborhoods people were just starting to notice, who'd had a habit of trusting people that proper society had already written off, who had told her once, when she asked about a partner she didn't recognize, sometimes the cleanest hands aren't the most honest ones. "Okay," she said. Ronan Vale looked at her. "Not okay that I trust you," she said. "Okay that I'll talk to the attorney." He nodded once, like that was exactly right. The attorney's name was Catherine Gould, and she worked out of an office in the West Loop that looked like it had been designed to feel calmer than the things being discussed inside it. She met Addie the following Tuesday, asked her 3 questions before she said anything else, and then put a folder on the desk between them. The trust existed. Marcus had established it 26 months before he died. It contained the Aldgate properties, 3 buildings in a neighborhood that had since appreciated significantly, and a business account that Darla's lawyers had claimed was part of the primary estate. It wasn't. It had never been. Marcus had structured it carefully and legally, and the reason it hadn't surfaced in the initial proceedings was that Darla's family had created enough procedural noise that Addie's original counsel had been playing defense since day one. Addie sat very still in the calm office and felt the ground shift under 14 months of assumed loss. "Why didn't this come up sooner?" she said. "It should have," Catherine said. "I contacted your previous attorney's office twice. I don't know what happened on their end." Addie made a note to find out. She also made a note to change attorneys, which she did the following week. What followed was 6 weeks of legal proceedings that Addie was not equipped to describe in detail, because most of it happened in documents and conference rooms she wasn't in, managed by Catherine and her team. What Addie was equipped to describe was the day Darla called her, direct, no lawyers, the first direct call in almost a year, and said, in a voice stripped of its usual management, "You should have stayed out of it." Addie said it was never mine to stay out of. The line was quiet for a moment. "Ronan Vale is not someone you want to be connected to," Darla said. "Whatever he's told you." "He told me the truth about a trust your family pretended didn't exist," Addie said. "That's the only thing he's told me. You can take the rest of the warning and put it wherever you put things that don't belong to you." She hung up. She sat in her kitchen for a moment, surprised by herself. She hadn't hung up on anyone in her life. She wasn't sure she'd had that particular sentence ready to say. It seemed to have arrived fully formed. She texted Ronan. Darla called. "She's worried." He texted back after a few minutes. "Good." Then, "Are you all right?" She thought about it, really thought about it, in a way she hadn't bothered to think about the state of herself in a long time. "Yes," she typed. "I think I might actually be." The resolution to the estate didn't happen in a single dramatic moment. Nothing like that does. It happened in stages, in increments, in a series of legally unremarkable filings that accumulated into an outcome. The Corrin family's contested claims were dismissed. The trust assets were transferred. The Aldgate buildings were hers, legally, clearly, with a paper trail long enough to end the argument. The Gala incident did not disappear cleanly, the way Addie might have hoped. Stories don't. But the story that circulated, the one about Addie Corrin wearing a stolen dress to a Whitmore Foundation event, got slowly overtaken by other, quieter information. The kind that moves through a different tier of the same social network. The kind that notes who Marcus Corrin's actual attorney had been, and what she'd found, and why a contested estate that should have been simple had taken 14 months to resolve. People revised their impression of Darla Corrin without necessarily saying they had. Addie didn't attend any further events. She did eventually leave the apartment. She found a smaller place, a few miles north, with a window that caught afternoon light in a way she liked. She kept the bakery shifts, not because she had to, but because the routine was real, and she'd earned the right to keep things that were real. Ronan Vale came for coffee every few weeks. Sometimes at the bakery, sometimes at the apartment. He'd been to the apartment twice by the point she realized she'd stopped counting his visits as unusual. He talked about property sometimes, obliquely, in the way of someone whose work was a fact of life rather than a topic of conversation. He talked about Marcus occasionally in a way that was careful and honest, and gave her pieces of her husband she hadn't had before. She gave him things too, without planning to, small things at first. That Marcus had kept a running list of every meal they'd ever had at restaurants, cross-referenced by whether they'd ordered the same thing, because he found the patterns interesting. That she'd taught herself to play piano in the apartment after he died, and had gotten to the point where she could play 2 songs badly. That she'd been afraid, for months after, that she was going to forget what his voice sounded like, and had gone back and listened to voicemails until her phone's battery died, just to run the voice through her ears again. Ronan listened to these things without flinching, without performing sympathy, without telling her what it meant or what she should do with it. He just listened, the way people listen, when they are genuinely interested in what they're hearing. She noticed, at some point, that she had stopped tensing her shoulders when she saw his name on her phone. She noticed, at some point, that she had started thinking of him in present tense rather than past. It was a Sunday morning in late November when he came to the apartment, and she'd left the door unlocked because she'd heard his car, and she was in the middle of something at the stove that couldn't be paused. He let himself in and sat at the kitchen table and read something on his phone while she finished, and she set a cup in front of him without asking, and he moved it to his left hand the way she'd noticed he always did, without looking up. She sat across from him. "I want to ask you something," she said, "and I want you to answer it honestly." He put the phone down. "The night at the gala," she said. "You came in and said I was there as your guest. You'd never met me. You'd been trying to get to me for 14 months and hadn't managed it. So why, the moment you saw what Darla was doing, why that, instead of something more measured?" He thought about it. She'd learned that he actually thought before he answered things, which was rare enough to be a quality she'd started to appreciate specifically. "Because I knew the method," he said. "I told you that. You said you recognized it. That's not the same as what I'm asking." He looked at her. Something in his face was quieter than usual, which for Ronan Vale meant it was very quiet. "I've seen what happens when someone is in the middle of that kind of moment," he said, "and the people around them do nothing. I've seen it enough that I can't watch it happen." That's the honest answer. She thought about that. "And I knew who you were," he said. "Not just that Marcus had talked about you. I'd read enough, seen enough, to know the kind of person you are. It wasn't a risk. Most people would say it was. Most people don't know what risk looks like." She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the November light was doing the low-angled thing it did on Sunday mornings in this apartment, cutting across the floor at a slant she'd come to think of as specifically hers. "I think," she said carefully, "that I've been doing a thing where I keep treating every new thing as temporary, to protect myself, because the last permanent thing ended." Ronan didn't say anything. He was listening. "I'm trying to stop doing that," she said. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he reached across the table, not impulsively. Nothing about him was impulsive, and put his hand over hers. "Okay," he said. "Simple as that." She turned her hand over under his. Outside, the light held. The city was quiet in the specific way it was quiet on Sunday mornings, when you were finally somewhere you meant to be. And for the first time in a long time, longer than 14 months, maybe longer than she'd fully admitted to herself, Addie Corrin felt like the ground under her was solid, not because someone had made it so, because she had let it be.